We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Could you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'm subbing in for our chair, Elaine Freeman, and we'll ask now that we go to the roll call.
Commissioner Parvin.
Here.
Commissioner Ramirez.
Here.
Commissioner Rooney.
Here.
Commissioner Ross.
Here.
Commissioner Zaragoza.
Here.
Chair Parks.
Here.
Vice Chair Parks.
Thank you.
Alternate Commissioner Richards.
Is there? Thank you. At this time, we'll go to agenda review. Are there any recommended changes to the agenda?
Chair,
Yes.
I would like to recommend that since the mitigation policy was continued from our last meeting, that we move that immediately following the consent items.
Okay, and as I understand, you have to leave early, so
I
that'll
do,
be convenient
yeah.
for you.
Thanks.
Okay, are there any objections to that? Okay, do you want to make that a motion since it's
Sure,
an item?
I'll make
on
a
the-
motion, please.
Okay, I'll go ahead and second it.
I'm sorry, who's the motioner?
Me, please.
Any second?
I seconded it. Are there any objections or abstentions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Yeah, so that is approved unanimously. And at this time, then, we will move on to our commission presentations and announcements. Are there any? Not seeing any. We'll go to public comments. Do we have any members of the public who wish to comment? Not seeing any. We'll go to our consent items, items 7 and 8. Do we have a motion
Second.
and a second?
Second was, I'm sorry?
Second from Ms. Rooney, motion from Supervisor Zaragoza. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any objections or abstentions? Not seeing any, we'll call that unanimous also. And now we're going to go at the request of Commissioner Rooney and go to item 11. This is the Commissioner's Handbook on consideration of agricultural mitigation measures by lead agencies in CEQA documents.
Just a minute.
Oh, we're waiting for the presentation to load?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, there we are. Okay, this is item number 11. It pertains to LAFCO as a responsible agency and the consideration of agricultural mitigation measures by lead agencies. I just want to give you a little bit of a background. This has been going on for close to 2 years now. This started back in 2015, and the reason for that was that the environmental documents, particularly EIRs that were being submitted to LAFCO for projects that were going to convert agricultural land to non-agricultural uses, were typically not including consideration of agricultural mitigation measures. So the commission, this was an ongoing concern that the commission really wanted to see these in these environmental documents. And so the commission was considering the formation and adoption of policies that would encourage lead agencies, primarily cities, to include this discussion in the EIRs that would come to LAFCO. So the commission did direct staff to arrange for a workshop, and this happened in September 10th, at which the commission received a host of information regarding agricultural mitigation. It included LAFCO policies about agriculture, LAFCO law pertaining to agriculture, legal opinions, and the laws pertaining to mitigation measures. And then actual mitigation measures, how they work, what the options are, and how they would be conducted and held. Following that meeting in October, at the October 21st, 2015 meeting, the commission actually considered the development of these mitigation policies. However, it was determined that because the first mitigation workshop, we weren't able to complete all of the information that was being presented, the commission chose to host a second workshop to receive that additional information before they made any direction. The second workshop was held March 24th of 2016, and again, the commission was provided a refresher of everything that happened at the first workshop and the additional information regarding these mitigation measures and the commission's authority to implement them or impose them. And at that meeting, the commission did direct staff to come back to develop some policy options and come back for the commission's consideration, which staff did and came to the commission on April 20th of last year with those options. There was 3 options, and they went into varying degrees of detail about these different types of mitigation measures and related factors. And the commission chose to adopt the least specific one. It didn't include the list of all of the mitigations and related factors. Instead, it included a reference to the government code that basically provides the authority of agencies to implement and oversee these types of mitigation measures. And they are included in those are conservation easements, fee title, and in lieu fees, essentially, as ways to permanently mitigate for the conversion of agricultural land. Now, the adopted policy added on to an existing policy in the CEQA guidelines, the Commission's CEQA policies, and it expanded Section 1431D. What was existing was that lead agencies in their environmental documents should consider the conversion of prime agricultural lands to urban uses and the protection, preservation of agricultural lands. That was existing. The addition to that policy that the Commission adopted was the underlined section here. For projects that would result in the conversion of prime agricultural land to non-agricultural uses, the environmental document should consider mitigation measures to address the potential loss of agricultural land as provided for under that government code section. And now the Commission, because it didn't adopt the specific mitigation measures as part of the policy, the Commission directed staff to come up with a listing of those mitigation measures and related factors as kind of an informational supplement to this policy. So the list of mitigation measures were not to be policy, only informational to the lead agencies, kind of conveying to the lead agencies what the Commission's expectations are of what should be in these environmental documents. So the Commission did direct staff to come back with some language that the idea was to post this language on the website, and it can be referred to by staff in letters to these lead agencies on their environmental documents. So staff came back to the Commission on September 21st of last year with the proposed language. It was amended slightly by the Commission, and then it was adopted by the Commission in September. Now, the approved language cites that section of the policy that was adopted previously by the Commission, and then it just lists the mitigation measures. And these are the mitigation measures that ended up in that in the additional language that was adopted by the Commission. Again, this is not policy; it was only informational. And for a full listing of the approved language, it's on page 63 of your staff report, but I won't go into it. So at that same meeting, the Commission, after it adopted the language, directed staff to get input from the Ventura County City Planning Association on the approved language, which we did. We approached the VCCPA, and they considered the language on 2 separate occasions. The first was in November of 2016, and the second was in January of this year. Now, the association, as an association, took no action on the language. Not everybody had concerns with the language. And it was agreed upon that any member agencies that did have a concern with the adopted language would contact LAFCO directly. So we did receive comment letters from the City of Ventura, the City of Oxnard, the City of Santa Paula, and an email from the Navy base Ventura County. I won't go into the email from Navy base Ventura County. It was generally supportive of the language, and it's discussed in the staff report. But I will go over the comment letters from the cities. They were largely the same letter. I mean, it was essentially a form letter, so it includes kind of the same concerns and the same recommended revisions to the approved language. And this is just a summary of them, and I'll talk about the 3 general areas. The first request or recommendation from the cities would be the removal of the reference to Government Code Section 65965 that was adopted as Commission policy. Now, as I mentioned, that Government Code section refers to specific types of mitigation measures. The cities would like to see that removed so the commission can include additional items to that list of mitigation measures. So it's no longer limited to those previously mentioned mitigation measures. And after doing that, the cities recommend then that the list of mitigation measures be expanded to include additional items. And these additional items were or are that general plan designations be considered as mitigation, zoning restrictions, SOAR designations, guidelines for orderly development, Greenbelt Agreement, and agricultural buffers. All are to be considered mitigation measures that can be evaluated in an environmental impact report. The problem here is that these items are not mitigation measures. Mitigation measures are intended to preserve in perpetuity land set aside as a mitigation to offset the impact of the conversion of agricultural land. None of these do that for several reasons. First of all, these don't apply to all agricultural lands. There are thousands of acres of agricultural lands within the county that don't fall under any of these items at all, that are just, they're not subject to SOAR, they're not subject to Greenbelt agreements. They are already in a general plan as being for urban development, even though they're being used as agricultural. So not all agricultural land is protected by these items. Also, each of these items specifically contain allowances for development to occur on agricultural land. General plan designations can be changed. SOAR designations. Not all land is included in curb or is excluded outside of curb boundaries. There is agricultural land that is within curbs and not subject to the SOAR protections. On top of that, SOAR doesn't apply in many cases to public projects like schools. Schools can still be built outside of curb lines on agricultural land. Greenbelt agreements, not all land is in Greenbelt agreements, and Greenbelt agreements can and have been amended to allow for development on agricultural land. And then agricultural buffers, that just does not set aside land and protect land in perpetuity. So for those reasons, these are not mitigation measures. And in addition to that, the Commission has adopted policies that already require that any annexations that are going to result in the conversion of agricultural land comply with these restrictions. There are specific policies addressing each one of these items already in the Commissioner's handbook. Now, even with these policies in place, the Commission still has approved development projects and annexations that have or will result in the conversion of over 1,300 acres of agricultural land since 2000. And there are approximately over 2,000 acres of agricultural land today that are not subject to these items, and for which about a few hundred of them we are anticipating to come before the Commission in the near future. So, I mean, in short, they do not meet the definition of mitigation measures.
Kai, can I ask a question?
Yes.
When you were receiving these responses from the cities, did you contact them and respond?
Not specifically to these letters. I received a draft of the letter from the city of Ventura, and it had made the rounds to all the CCPA members, and I'm on that list. And I responded to that letter correcting what was in it, basically saying that what I told you, that the Commission already considered all of these items during the workshops, and the Commission has adopted policies already addressing all of these items, and that these are not policy, that this is not a policy document, it's an informational document. And I sent that out, that response, to all of the CCPA members. But then we still got the final letters in their draft form, essentially.
Okay,
So.
thanks.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, the cities recommend that LAFCO self-impose some restrictions on itself regarding the review of these environmental documents that contain these mitigation measures. And in short, the Commission is required to comply with CEQA on its own. It is required under CEQA to exercise its independent discretion to evaluate and, if feasible, mitigate impacts to the environment that are a result of the Commission's determinations or decisions, and that would include, the conversion of agricultural land. So any recommendation to impose a limitation on that discretion, that independent discretion, would be inconsistent with CEQA. So,
And if I can interrupt too, state law requires CEQA documents that have loss of ag land, that mitigation measures be considered?
state law and more than one court determination, right? They are
'Cause
required to
I think
be.
that's really where it starts. You know, the state law says you have to have this consideration in your EIRs if you're going to have loss of farmland.
Right.
And so they're not essentially meeting state law when we get them. And I would think that would leave us open to litigation, not just the lead agency, but LAFCO too, if we're basing our decision on an environmental impact report that doesn't meet the requirements of state law.
Potentially, that's why the courts have ruled, issued opinions regarding this, is because they were sued. These agencies were sued over CEQA.
So it just leaves us open for being part of that lawsuit because we have to rely on the EIR.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair, and do the cities understand that these items were not mitigation items, number one, and number two, that how can we violate CEQA in events?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I explained that. I mean, this whole process has, these items were considered throughout this process at the workshops. You'll recall that they were brought up, and the commission did not consider them at that time to be mitigation measures. That's why the policy that was adopted by the commission was specific to the government code, which talked about those specific types of mitigation measures that were talked about and evaluated at the workshops. Mm-hmm. And then, I did contact the cities that were writing these letters and indicated that these were not considered to be mitigation measures for all of the reasons that I outlined here today, yet we still received the letters.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay. So the recommendation is that the commission not modify the approved language to reflect these items. However, we do recommend one change that was suggested by the cities, and that is to separate the discussion or the list. Right now, that list has the types of mitigation measures that can be considered, and then the related factors to those mitigation measures, all in one list. So we would recommend that some additional language be included to separate out those items. So the first listing would be the types of mitigation measures that could be considered. And then if these mitigation measures are considered, then these factors related to those mitigation measures should also be included in that consideration. So it's basically taking the wording there, but then just separating it out into two separate categories. So we would recommend that be the only change to the approved language.
Madam Chair, so throughout the whole staff report and your comments this morning, it was always to talk about consider, be considered, and so when this revised language came in, it felt to me like it was inconsistent with the staff report when it said, oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Go
sorry,
back.
I was getting back to here.
No,
So-
go to where you were.
Okay, back forward.
So as we were talking in the staff report, it's always been, it's not policy, it's suggestions, and it should considers. And my concern of the inconsistency is where it says, when considering such mitigation measures, lead agencies should include, which changes the level of work, on this process. So I think that's the inconsistent part of should include, because to me, that puts a mandatory action on it rather than could include or should consider.
So you prefer
change
the
those two
words could include?
Could include is fine, or should consider. I mean, whichever one. I think that maintains consistency in the intent.
I feel like we had that discussion last time we were looking at this, and in fact, if you go back to where you were looking, there it is, that could be considered.
Right, and that was my thought when I came up with the language, was that the overall language says that, that examples of mitigation measures that could be considered. So these four could be considered. If you are going to consider them, then you should consider these as related to those that you could consider. That was my thought.
Yeah, I think that this was always an option. It wasn't policy. And so it seems to me that when we put the word should include, we now make it mandatory. And that was not the intent of the whole conversation over the last couple of years. So that's where I think that it just should change those two words.
Commissioner Ramirez?
I'd like to go to our council and have a little bit of a discussion about the should and would and might and could, and et cetera.
Or shall?
Shall, must, might.
What is. I understand what Mr. Luoma was saying about what his intent was, but I also certainly understand what Commissioner Rooney is saying. As one judge once told me, in your redundancy is your clarity. So, if you have a place where it says that you could consider these and then later on you say should include, you do potentially have an inconsistency as to what the commission's intent was with that language. So if you change it to say, may include or should consider related implementation factors, you're tracking more with your language above. And what I certainly understood from the prior many times we've discussed this was the intent of the commission.
The intent.
Thank you.
But when you look at the actual items, if we could just discuss those, because the idea that when you're preserving farmland, it should be in Ventura County, I'd say that's a should. Some of those things definitely are things that are preferred, right? If you're going to preserve land that has related resources, it should be assisting ongoing agriculture land. There's that word should again. Preservation of land of a similar soil quality. That sounds like something that you should definitely consider when you're doing mitigation measures. Do you have recommended language that you'd prefer, that these are factors that should be?
Well, I think that if we go to the intent of the commission, and I liked what Mr. Walker had to say, is that in your redundancy comes the clarity. And so I think that if we could change it to could consider in the revised language there, and also part of this goes in the handbook and part of it is not, right? So if all of this on page 68 was intended to be in the handbook, I think that there should be more of a clarity of breaking it apart to say, here's the policy and here is some suggested ways to do that. So just to really reiterate that this is not policy, and to maintain the intent of the commission's decision. So I guess I'm asking for two changes there, to break it apart further with a caveat to say this is not policy, but some options, and then to change the word.
And if this information that we're looking at, that's not for the handbook, that's for the website?
Correct.
Right.
Yes, the approved language would all go on the website, the language that was approved. The policy that's referenced in here was already adopted back in September of a year ago. So what, in the language that's going on the website, we just refer to the policy. The policy says that you should include discussion of mitigation measures. The policy says should.
It says should include or should consider.
The adopted policy, well, I'll go back to it.
Yeah, it's on your
Because
slide.
everything I read in the staff report said should consider.
This is what the adopted policy says. This was
Should
adopted.
consider.
Yes, okay, that would result in the measures of,
So I think if we stay along those lines, then we
Right, should
capture the
consider.
Okay,
intent, right?
so the word should
It says should.
consider in the,
so that's
what
in the
should be
policy,
included?
right? So now what we're talking about today is just what's going to go on the website, that we reference this policy, and then here are the mitigation measures that can be considered to adhere to this policy.
And can you go back to the language in question now?
Yeah, that doesn't have the entire listing on page 68 of the staff report of
That's
what it would
correct.
look like.
Mhm.
So, because further on page 68, it says examples of mitigation measures that could be considered. And then the revised language says should consider. So I think we should just continue it on to could be considered. Sorry. Should, would, could, yeah.
I have a question, Chair.
Yes.
Relative to, let's say, for example, I'm in Simi Valley, and there's some land that might work out, but it's actually in LA County, but it borders up to Simi Valley. Even though it's kind of specific to Ventura County, would that be something that you think LAFCO would consider?
No, because city boundaries cannot cross into another county.
Okay, just wanted to know that.
And just to bring closure to this one here, if we took out the word, or inserted the word should consider instead of should include?
Yes.
Okay. That sounds like a good way to deal with it. If there's no objections, yes.
Madam Chair,
Alternate Commissioner Richards.
just out of clarification, Kai, is there a definition of what constitutes prime agricultural land in our policies?
It's in LAFCO law, actually. It's the same definition as in the Williamson Act law.
And I have a second question. Is there a limitation on size? Are we talking about 10 acres or greater, or 20 acres or greater?
Typically, we've used the county's Williamson Act policies, which say that a farm is commercially viable on prime ag land if it's at least 9 acres in size. So we've usually used that as the threshold between what constitutes significant impact to prime agricultural land as opposed to not significant.
Because throughout the county, there's a number of smaller agricultural parcels. So they would not be encumbered by this language.
Well, and it all depends on what the lead agency also prepares. I know that, like, the county's definition of the county's threshold between a significant impact and an insignificant impact is 5 acres of agricultural land that is being converted. So I don't know if all the cities have adopted different thresholds for that, but typically we will evaluate it based on that 9-acre commercial viability threshold.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rooney?
I have a point of clarification. So on the Commission's administrative supplement to the CEQA that's in our handbook, it's the preamble here to page 68. So when we have something that's in the administrative supplement, is that considered policy if it's part of the supplement?
Yes, it's in the handbook. It's policy.
So anything in the handbook is policy?
Bylaws and policies, yes.
So if if this is not policy, but yet it's in the supplement, which is considered policy, then how do we rectify that this is not policy?
This is not added to the supplement. The approved language back in September to 1431D, that's policy. That's in the supplement, the CEQA supplement. The language that the commission approved at the last meeting and is considering here today, this is not going to be added to the supplement.
It's just
So-
the website. It's some advice on the website that you can get.
So then on page 68 of the staff report, it has the title of consideration of ag mitigation measures. Then it gives the preamble, and then it goes through the examples. So to me, it looked like this was part of the supplement, which then becomes policy, which we've all said is not policy.
Right, and this is not proposed to be in the supplement.
So on the website, we're talking about the language for the website. You're not going to put the first 2 paragraphs on the website?
No, we would put all of this language on the website and just refer to it.
Okay, so to me, it's not clear, because to me, it looks like that this is part of the administrative supplement, which is policy. And so I'm wondering, is there a way, if you intend on putting the first 2 paragraphs on there, to me, it looks like it's the part of the supplement. If they don't go back and look at the handbook, I'm wondering if we can put something on there that this is not policy, it's not part of the supplement, it's just a guideline for consideration, just to make it clearer.
How we label it when we put it on there, we can have that discussion, but let's first see what it is that we're going to be putting on the website. And again, it is a guideline to assist with the policy that we have, but we didn't want to be so specific as to put it in the policy itself. And, do you have more to your presentation?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, that's just a recommendation to include this. And as I mentioned, this language was approved by the commission a couple of meetings ago. This would be the only change that I'm recommending.
So maybe an introductory information as to why this is on the website. You know, we just explain what you basically what you said, that is, the policies in the guidebook, handbook, and that this is to assist with meeting that policy. Or
we can certainly do that if that's the direction from the commission.
well, we have had this before us a few times. We have one speaker card, unless there's other questions for staff. Yes, Commissioner Richards.
A lot of this language is certainly beneficial, but recognize that there's always the statement of overriding considerations in environmental documents. I don't know if there's consideration for stating that there's no exit out of by adopting a statement of overriding consideration. That's always a large exit hole associated with environmental documents. And I didn't know if there was any previous discussion about statements of overriding consideration.
Well, the thing that we have been seeing is the environmental documents don't consider any mitigation measures and just jump right to the overriding considerations, and that's accurate. So
I didn't know if there was language that you wanted to put in as to don't immediately jump to that provision of the environmental law that allows for that, and it includes some language that basically says you need to consider these, at least illustrate how you've considered these. But anyways, just a side comment. Thank you.
Another question?
sure. Commissioner Parker.
As far as, let's say, for example, a school district wants to, once again, build on some farmland, will they have to comply with this? Or are they exempt from complying with these guidelines?
If it's going to come before LAFCO or any other responsible agency, yes, they need to comply with these guidelines. This is a requirement under CEQA.
Okay.
They should be doing this as it is. Right.
They have a lot of power, but they still have to do an EIR if they're...
Right, and then the commission has to then consider that environmental document independently of what the school district did. The school district or a city can adopt an overriding consideration for the impact to ag. That doesn't mean that LAFCO has to. LAFCO can now consider it independently under its own discretion and come to a different conclusion. And this would help the commission evaluate the extent of the impact of the conversion of ag land.
And that's with any agency, school districts, cities, anyone. They can do an overriding consideration. We still have the opportunity to review.
Correct, yes. You have to make your own independent findings.
Shall we go to public comment then? Okay, Ms. Lynn Jensen with CoLab, followed by Dave Ward with City of Ventura.
Thank you. Good morning. Lynn Jensen with Ventura County CoLab. I just want to say that I appreciate the comments by Commissioner Rooney and agree with them in general. Just want to remind the Commission that on April 20th, 2016, you guys did unanimously adopt the language for projects that would result in the conversion of prime agricultural land to non-agricultural uses. The environmental document should consider mitigation measures to address the potential loss of agricultural land as provided for under Government Code Section 65965 et al. And then afterwards, again, you decided that you wanted to have some guidance for on the website. And just to go through some of the commissioner comments again, create a list that will not be mandatory, not adhered to but to be considered, not all inclusive, not part of the guidelines, and then bring it back to how to present it on the website, because we need to have a context of how this is going to be presented on the website. Agree with that. And also, people have to have access to what other communities are doing. This is educational. And so that was kind of the consideration. And then in the ag mitigation workshops, again, it was a 2-year process. And what came out of it from our perspective was that land use planning is not within LAFCO's authority, and the commission cannot require specific mitigation measures. The CEQA process already requires consideration of mitigation measures for the loss of prime farmland. And I also want to point out that Santa Paula's East Area 1 project in 2015 did result in both agricultural and open space easements for mitigations for those developments. And then lead agencies do not have to adopt any mitigation measures, and economic feasibility is a consideration. And those were the things that we looked at during the ag workshops. The staff recommended language on page 68 quotes the Commissioner's handbook, and it kind of makes it look like all of that is in the handbook, and that was concerning to us. We think that lead agencies could be confused if they don't go back to the handbook thinking that, again, this is policy. And we'd like to see a clear statement that the suggested language following the adopted handbook measures are not included in the Commissioner's handbook, just to make that clarification. And again, the separation language that's on page 68 that you guys were talking about when considering such mitigation measures, and the mitigation measures could be conservation easements, you want to encourage the lead agencies to look at conservation easements. And when you say they should include related implementation factors, then that seems like it's limiting, and it may even cause them not to want to consider them because they have to consider these particular implementation factors. We want them to be creative and actually and work out the mitigation measures and find things that are feasible. So we do agree that it should include should be changed to could consider or should consider, or however you want to do that, to encourage consideration. And context on the website is important. So as we said a year ago, this was actually a year ago, this has been a long road of consideration. There's been many meetings, a lot of experts weighing in on it. And we hope that the cities under this policy will be able to execute their general plans and plan developments to provide adequate buffers to protect farmland. That's really what we're interested in the urban interface. We are very concerned about schools being built in the farmland, not having any buffers, and impacting the agricultural community on the edges. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Dave Ward with the City of Ventura, followed by our last speaker, Jan Amiss with the City of Santa Paula.
Thank you and good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to speak before you. I'm Dave Ward, Planning Manager at the City of Ventura. I'm here today representing the city, although I would note that the Ventura County City and Planning Association did have discussions back in November. Executive Officer Loma unfortunately wasn't able to be at that particular meeting, but that discussion and consideration of the letters that came in from various cities did include discussion and text edits that were from the cities of Fillmore, Camarillo, Thousand Oaks, Oxnard, Ventura, and the county, and Santa Paula. I think the fundamental concern that we have is this still appears to be policy. The way this is being crafted, and even your own discussions this morning, how does this work? How does this fit? It's going to be on the website. It's not in the policy handbook. It's going to be a guideline. Well, maybe it's not. Our concern is how is this really going to be implemented? And you're looking at the practitioner. We're the ones coming in, following the projects that come through our cities, following the directions of our city council and planning commission, and then have to submit. So I would encourage that if this is going to be on the website, disassociated from the handbook, not to be policy, that some of your discussion today about adding additional language, I think it needs to be titled guideline, which again is some of our edits that we provided in our letter. It frames it a little bit better. It highlights where you're wanting agencies to look at various mitigation measures, but that upfront context is really, really important, and I think you should incorporate that. I think the specific text edit to could rather than should, again, is very important and should be incorporated. Our particular letter focuses too on the fact that agencies may have in previous policy documents including voter initiatives of SOAR, already set a framework for protecting agriculture in our actual adoption of the general plan. This whole discussion of this guideline has no reference or bearing on the fact that an agency may have gone through great detail of an updated general plan, significant community engagement, balance the trade-offs of do we continue to spread and grow outwardly, impacting more ag lands, or do we actually focus internally on an infill first strategy? That's what the City of Ventura did in 2005. We had areas of our sphere that were designated for residential use that had environmental review done, including statements of overriding considerations, but it was weighing the balances of how your community is going to grow and do it appropriately. And ag preservation is a principle and focus of our general plan. So our edits to this guideline that I hope you still will consider is actually providing that additional framework, that not all cities here in the county are the same. We know you've had various annexation proposals before you coming from different contexts. You're losing that context base by not adding what we've suggested here that talks about how you may have already addressed part of ag conservation by actual policy language of that particular city. I think that's important to incorporate. Lastly is the process of filing the applications. If this really is going to be guideline, treated as lesser than policy, that's good. Clarify that language on the document, clarify the location on the website, because how are folks, planners, going to know where to find this when they're only looking at the policy handbook itself? So again, the intent language is important. You've recently seen me here before on the North Bank Venoni project. That process required us to have an entire hearing on whether an application could even be accepted for filing. Is this going to be the same scenario when we come forward with another annexation, that we haven't addressed a guideline and we're not allowed to even move forward? So that happened in November. We don't want to be there. So the clarity you can provide today, I think, is really important, and the City of Ventura would appreciate that. Thank you for your time.
Could I ask you a question? There are lots of things out there, fortunately, in our county for preservation of farmland, and obviously SOAR is one of them, the guidelines for orderly development, all the ones you listed. But as far as requiring in an EIR when you're proposing to get rid of farmland, do you agree that you have to consider mitigation measures for the loss of that farmland?
Certainly, you have to address the statewide significance of that agricultural land in your environmental document. You need to weigh the consideration of mitigation measures and feasibility.
Okay.
And then, as addressed before, there could be the statement of overriding considerations.
Oh,
In
yeah.
my instance, it's at the general plan level where we actually did that great debate and decided, is this the growth policy that we want to choose? But yes, I agree with that.
Just that consideration of mitigation measures, just those things. So there's all these other things out there that we have, but the actual, part of the EIR that considers mitigation measures, that's what we're finding lacking. So that's what we're looking at, mitigation measures. And just the consideration, and that's what state law says. Doesn't say you have to implement them, just that you have to consider those.
Right. And the flexibility to process that at the local
You agree
agency,
with
it's
that?
important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Jana Minsk, and we just got one more card in from Kathleen Mallory with the City of Oxnard.
Good morning,
Maloney's.
Commissioners. I'm Jana Minsk with the City of Santa Paula. I'm the Planning Director. It's nice to be before you again. A little different situation than in the past with Santa Paula. Excuse me. As Dave Ward indicated, many of the city county planning directors have met several times and discussed the item before you today. And I'll be brief. You have a letter from Santa Paula, City of Ventura, and we basically have the same thoughts and feelings. What I'd like to say is I was pleased to hear from Commissioner Rooney on page 68 of your staff report looking at the consistency between policies and what you'd like us to do and how to implement things, as taking the which should include and changing it to either should consider or could consider. That really helps those of us who have to implement these things a lot better because we have consistency in the words used to do that. I'd also like to call your attention to the attachments to all of our letters that have some suggested text, as Dave Ward indicated, of some of our ideas that we would like you to consider and potentially incorporate into the consideration of agricultural mitigation measures that's before you today. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And then our last speaker card
Am I correct? It's Kathleen Mallory? Mallory?
Hello, Kathleen
Good.
Mallory, Planning Manager for the City of Oxnard. Thank you for having this item before you. I think it's important with all of the three cities that submitted comment letters that we're all here and present. The City of Oxnard has spent a significant amount of time engaging on this issue. We submitted the comment letter to LAFCO. We really do hope that you'll look at our suggested language within that letter. We very much support the issues and the comments that Dave Ward and Jana have made on this issue. We are in alignment on that. I think it's most important that this group look at how not taking a one-size-fits-all approach. What we have done in the City of Oxnard, our general plan, which was updated 2011, pardon me, we really went through and outlined a series of mitigation measures that we thought and we believed represented what our community wanted. So we are looking at not establishing just a one-size-fits-all to address the issue, but really look at the uniqueness for Ventura County and not consider just a straight guideline of government code. Instead, really reflect what our general plan identified. It also doesn't take into consideration some of the unique challenges and programs and policies that we have in Ventura County, as was mentioned by Commissioner Parks. So we also would like there to be the use of the word should consider, very much again support what Ms. Mintz mentioned about the language. And we do hope that you'll look at our comment letters and specifically the suggested language that we are recommending here today. And I'm here to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. And that concludes our public comment. So we have a couple of suggested changes from our public, led by Ms. Rooney. And I think we have decided on that one that they're requesting to not say should include, and maybe should consider.
Should consider. I would like to make a motion that we modify the language as presented to say should consider, and then also to take a recommendation from the cities to put Ventura LAFCO guideline at the top of the document as we're referring to that. So that's my motion with those two, please.
Is there a second? I'll second. You have a second?
Can I,
And do we have comments to the motion, Commissioner Ramirez?
Mr. Ward suggested that there be language at the top saying, we've been saying informational versus any indication it's mandatory. But that's for the website.
Okay. Do you want to insert that too, that this is informational guidelines?
What does the maker of the motion think?
I'm fine with that. As far as if our
that's
council
what it
can
is.
weigh in on informational guideline is not policy, right? Is that the intent? Okay. I'd be happy to
Okay.
amend my motion.
And
Thank you.
okay, and you have a question,
Got
comment?
a comment. Actually, a question. So one of the comments from the cities was, if we're reading the policy, is there anywhere in the handbook that then says refer to the guidelines on our website? If not, is that something that can easily be done, or does that require more
Would you like
activity
to
on the topic?
include that in the motion?
I think that the more clarity we can provide to applicants is a good thing. And so if I don't have our policy here of what it says, but if there is a reference to refer them to the informational guidelines in the supplement, I would be happy
Okay,
to
so
include that.
Let's add that.
Good
And
suggestion.
it's referring to the website for informational guidelines.
Right, for the informational
We,
guidelines.
we do have a potential Brown Act issue with respect to including any language, regardless of what it says.
That's what I was getting
at.
In the Commissioner's Handbook,
In the
since
policy.
this matter wasn't noticed for
All
the
right.
Commissioner's Handbook.
So the motion could be then, and to come back to add that to the policy.
Okay, I'm going to withdraw my first motion, and let's start again. So my motion would include that we change the language of staff report number 68 to say should consider, and then secondly, that it say informational guideline, not policy, right? And then thirdly, to review the policy to amend to say, refer to the informational guideline in the supplement.
On the website.
At a future
On the
agenda.
website. That is my
Okay.
motion.
And I will second that.
We have a second on that also. Any further discussion?
No, Madam Chair, I just want to thank the cities for the recommendations, and I think that makes it easier for all of us, and anybody that's looking at the guidelines or the website to go to the guidelines of policy. But I just want to thank the cities for their input. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a very long process, one of our longest ones, but it took a lot of finessing, and it looks like we've got there. So with that, could we have a roll call on the motion?
Commissioner Parvin.
Aye.
Commissioner Ramirez.
Aye.
Commissioner Rooney.
Aye.
Commissioner Ross.
Aye.
Commissioner Zaragoza.
Aye.
Commissioner Parks.
Aye. Thank you, and that passes. And I know we have people from the Camarillo Airport here, so let's go to item 9.
Thank you. Thank you for moving that up.
And Commissioner Rooney has to leave, but we still have a quorum, so we're doing good. Thank you.
Good morning. The request is for the approval of the provision of sewer service by the Camarillo Sanitary District outside its jurisdictional boundaries through an out-of-agency service agreement known as an OASA, and that would be to accommodate the development of new aircraft hangars on 20 acres at the northeast corner of the Camarillo Airport. And the hangars would be included in this area here, as well as down in that strip, and over here would be commercial development. The OASA area is shown in red on these maps, and the surrounding the proposed development is development that's commercial in nature to the north and east of the development. That's within the city of Camarillo, and then the rest of the Camarillo Airport is to the south and to the west, including existing hangars right in this area, also shown right in here. LAFCO law provisions for OASAs are established in Government Code Section 56133 and state that services by a local agency are to be provided within the jurisdictional boundaries of that agency, and that there are exceptional circumstances where annexation to an agency is not feasible or appropriate. And also for OASA requests within the service provider's sphere of influence, the Commission may approve new or extended services only in anticipation of a later change of organization, such as an annexation. In addition, the Ventura LAFCO Commissioner's Handbook has policies pertaining to the approval of OASAs. As an MND, a mitigated negative declaration, was prepared as the CEQA document. The Commission is the decision maker for this OASA. There are also several standards for approval of OASAs, including those related to consistency with the applicable general plan, determination of no other service provider, lack of contiguity making annexation infeasible, and consent of the property owner to future annexation. All of these standards have been met, except for that which states that annexation is infeasible due to lack of contiguity with the existing boundaries of the district. The 20-acre area is, in fact, is contiguous to the existing district boundaries, and therefore annexation is feasible at this time, so a waiver of the Commission's policy is necessary in order to approve the OASA. The county currently operates and maintains the existing sewer infrastructure at the airport. The county and the district have agreed that the district is expected within 5 years to assume operation and maintenance of all the sewer infrastructure at the airport upon improvements being made to the current infrastructure maintained by the county. So rather than make two separate requests to LAFCO for annexation to the district within the 5-year period and the duplication of all the costs related to annexation, the approval of an OASA at this time would enable construction of those aircraft hangars now to be followed by one annexation proposal by the district at a later time. If overall annexation is delayed beyond 5 years, the district would pursue annexation of the OASA area independently of the entire airport facility. As mentioned, the county adopted a mitigated negative declaration for the project under CEQA. LAFCO's action regarding the OASA request is also subject to CEQA, and the recommended action includes the Commission's adoption of the findings provided in the county's CEQA document. Staff recommends that the Commission certify that it has reviewed and considered the information contained in the MND prepared by the county, and that it adopt the resolution approving the OASA. That concludes the presentation. Available for questions, as well as the Camarillo Sanitary District and airport staff are also here available for questions.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you know, I belong to the Airport Authority, and it was discussed thoroughly at the Airport Authority, and also we have, you know, at the Airport Authority, council members from the city of Camarillo, and so because we have the Camarillo and the Oxnard Authority, and it was approved, you know, by the authority at that time. So I'm not sure if there's any additional discussions.
Okay, and I don't have any cards. Shall I close the public hearing and entertain a motion?
So I move approval.
We have a motion and a second from Commissioner Ramirez. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposition? Any abstentions? Seeing none, that also passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Sorry you had to wait. Next item on our agenda is our final budget and work plan. That's item 10.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. This is agenda item number 10. It is the recommended final budget for next fiscal year. There we go. Just a bit of background. LAFCO law does require that the commission adopt a proposed budget by May 1st of every year, which the commission did last month at the last month meeting. And it provides that LAFCO must adopt a final budget by June 15th. This, of course, is that final budget. So the recommended final budget is nearly identical to the proposed budget that was approved by the commission last year, except for some very non-substantive language revisions. I want to provide just a little bit of just a brief overview of the current fiscal year before I move into the proposed budget. The budgets are for expenditures. They're separated into three general categories: total, the salaries and benefits, services and supplies, and contingencies. The adopted budget for this year was $506,750 in total salaries. We are projecting about $500,000 in expenditures for salaries, for a savings of about $7,500. Services and supplies, the adopted budget anticipated about $163,000 to be spent. We are projecting spending about $140,000 for a savings of $22,165. And we did not spend any of the $33,478 in contingencies, and that results in an estimated savings at the end of this fiscal year of a little over $63,000. Now, regarding revenue, again, that is separated into three categories: interest earnings, revenue from fees, and then the revenue from other governmental agencies. We are anticipating a deficit of about $1,000 that's due to less than anticipated application fees. So at the end of this fiscal year, we are anticipating a projected fund balance of a little over $62,000. And I'll go into the proposed budget for next fiscal year. Again, these are the three categories of expenditures. So for this year's adopted budget, total salaries and benefits were $506,750. We are proposing total salary benefits of $525,850. Services and supplies, the current budget is $162,800. We are proposing a decrease of that of about $12,000 to $150,050. And for contingencies, the current budget contains contingencies of $33,478. We are recommending contingencies of $67,591. Now, the reason for this is that current commission policy does require contingencies be set aside for 10% of total expenditures. That's what the $67,591 represents. That's consistent with current policy. The $33,000 from this fiscal year, that was 5%. The commission adopted 5% and waived the commission policies just due to the extensive, the amount of increase that 10,000 would be.
Is that contingency, is that also called reserves, or do we have reserves?
It's a type of reserves, yes. It's not fund balance, but it's actually budgeted for contingencies.
And our policy says 10%.
Policy says 10%,
And
right.
that's, okay.
Right, unless there's an extraordinary circumstance, and the commission considered there was an extraordinary circumstance adopting the 5%. So this $67,000, this increase by about $34,000 is the reason why the overall total expenditures are going up 5.8% here. When you take away this $34,000, the budget is actually increasing by only about 1%. Now, I say that because this amount, the increase in the contingencies is going to be offset by the application of fund balance left over from this year, as well as some fund balance that the commission has just on hand.
So that's basically money in the bank then?
Right, it's just basically transferring money from fund balance into the contingencies to increase it to 10%. So there's going to be no overall cost transferred onto the funding agencies.
Okay.
Financing sources, again, three categories: fund balance, miscellaneous revenue, and then revenue from other agencies. We are recommending an appropriation of fund balance like we did last year, or this year, I should say, which was $65,000. We're going to use about $2,800 of that, and that's where we get that $63,000 or $62,000 in fund balance left over. We are recommending we apply that along with an additional $32,000 to next year's budget. Again, funds that the commission already has, and this will serve to decrease the amount of money collected from the other funding agencies. We're recommending or estimating revenues of $21,500 from miscellaneous revenue and $626,991 from other agencies. Now, this is an increase of about 1.6% over this year's budget. It equates to only about a little over $3,500 for each of these funding groups. So we have kept the increase to a minimum. So overall, the anticipated revenues are going to increase from $703,000 to $743,491.
Just a comment, it did surprise me to see that the county as a whole pays a third of it all, being that the population in the unincorporated county is equivalent to or less than many of the cities. So just kind of throwing that out there.
Yeah, it is the single largest funding agency for LAFCO. And with that, we do recommend that you adopt the resolution approving the recommended final budget and adopting the work plan for next fiscal year. And that concludes my presentation.
Comments, questions, motion?
To me, it's a balanced budget.
Yes.
It's a really good budget, so.
And it's good to see the contingency there.
Exactly right. The money's in the bank. I'm not sure if Dave had, but I'd like to make a
Just one question on Kai, if we anticipate or if you can foresee going into the next year and also having a fund balance at that point, do you have any strategy where, or any idea or notion where we would transfer that money to if we've already got the contingency fully funded?
Yeah, into the budget basically. We can use some of that money to again keep the increases to the funding agencies at a minimum. Yeah, we can actually put it in as revenue.
Okay.
We still have a fairly healthy unassigned fund balance even after using this $95,000. The ultimate plan would be to draw that down as we tighten up our budgets every year.
Got it. Great.
So I'd like to make a motion to approve the budget.
Okay, we have a motion
I'd second.
and a second. Any objections or abstentions? All who support, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, got that a little backwards, but got to the end. Thank you for that, and we'll call that unanimous. And now we go on to, is it our recommendation on canceling the June 7, 2017 meeting?
So moved.
Motion?
Second.
Second.
Yeah.
A motion from Commissioner Ramirez, second by Commissioner Parvin. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any objection or abstentions? Not seeing any. That passes also. We have an informational item. I don't think that requires any vote. The executive officers report too.
No, nothing, just that the next meeting will be in July 19th.
And any commissioners' comments? I do have an invitation to doing another quarterly dinner event, so we'll pass it out. And we're about 2/3 full already, but please feel free to share, and staff is welcome too. We have staff members and officials and public all invited. So I'll get this to you too. It's on the pros and cons of wind turbines off the Central Coast, and there are actually some proposals out there. I discovered there's the Bureau of Energy Management, of Ocean Energy Management. I didn't even know it exists, and they're right out here in Camarillo, BOEM, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and they're considering a couple of proposals. These would be far enough off the coast that the Coastal Commission and others won't be able to, local authority have much say unless they, tap into the land part of it. But it is fascinating, the concept of putting huge windmills out in the ocean, and they're considering one now that would be on floating platforms. I don't know if it's hundreds or thousands of acres, but it's a very large project. And so since they had one unsolicited proposal, they're now opening it up and finding out what's out there, and are getting some other proposals too. So interesting, a lot of pros and cons. And you're all welcome to attend. With that, we'll go ahead and adjourn and to our next meeting after the summer, I guess.
So Supervisor, is
Yes.
Moqueca and Thousand Oaks similar, or in?
Yes,
connection
there's
with
the
it?
same.
The one here at the
same-
harbor?
Same owner.
Oh, Brazilian.
Yes, Brazilian.
Okay.
We have a wonderful sea bass on our menu there too.
Okay.
All right,
Thank
we
you.
stand adjourned.
Thank you.